You know, what can one person really do, especially an average person, maybe someone with a blue-collar job? What can one person really do to have a profound impact on the world? Well, on December 1st, 1955, a young lady did just that. And tonight, we're all going to hear her story on the power of one. I have learned through the years that when one's mind is made up, that diminishes fear. Knowing what must be done does away with fear. That is a quote from Miss Rosa Parks, and many of you know her name, certainly because on December 1st in 1955, she was a gal who was just coming home from work. She was a woman in her 40s. She was a seamstress. There was nothing overwhelming or special about her at that point. But what she did is she took action. She got rid of her fear, and when a white gentleman came along, and as the law stated back then, on the bus, asked her to move so he could have a seat, she refused. She knew it was wrong, and instead of doing what the law said, and instead of doing what fear would have told her to do, just go along with everyone, she took a stand and she refused to move, and she was arrested for it, and she was fined for it. But the bottom line is that started the civil rights movement in this country and got rid of the ugliest chapter in American history. Absolutely unbelievable what that gal did, and I just want to really analyze it for a few minutes tonight, folks, because once again, I think so many of us feel like in order to have a big impact, we have to be special. We have to have a college education. We have to have a high-profile job. We have to have something amazing about us, and Rosa Parks is a great example, as I just stated. She was just an average gal. She wasn't young and full of promise. She was in the middle of her life or on the second part of her life, whatever you want to say when you're in your 40s, and she was in a position where she was just nothing special, but she did the right thing, and the nation took notice. It was being in the right place at the right time. If you don't know the exact story, what happened was Martin Luther King, who was pretty unknown to people, this all took place in Montgomery, Alabama, and he was in a situation where hardly anyone knew who he was, but he came along and organized a boycott of that bus company that they anticipated would just be a one-day thing to make a point, and it went on for well over 300 days, close to 400 days. That group boycotted the buses in Montgomery, Alabama, and they actually made such a commotion over this that it got pushed up to the Supreme Court, and as we all know, that law was overturned as it rightfully should have been, and now we have equality the way it's supposed to be. And you know what? None of that would have been possible without the strength of Miss Rosa Parks. So obviously, one person who was in their power, who had had enough, who got rid of fear, did something remarkable that affected tens of millions and eventually maybe even billions of life as life goes on in these United States. But I just want to ask you a question. What right now are you afraid of? What is fear doing in your life to hold you back? Because I thought that was a really interesting quote. Obviously, Ms. Park went on, and over the years, she was able to talk to many organizations. She became a prominent part of the NAACP. She became a prominent part of women's rights movements all throughout the United States. She was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She had all sorts of awards. She really became somebody who was the voice of the people. And it's remarkable. I'm sure, once again, if you were to talk to her a few days before this incident came about, she did not envision herself being that person, but she was thrust into the limelight, and she was willing to take on the mantle and do what she needed to do. And she was really remarkable as far as getting women's voting rights, all sorts of things she did to empower people in this country. But once again, I just want to share with you, she did all that, and as the years went by and she was interviewed and spoke so many times, her and her husband actually set up a foundation for personal development that had an impact on teens all over this country. Still to this day, they take teenagers and they take them on tours of the United States, and they share with them where the civil rights movement started and why everything was such an important part of it. But having said all that, of all the press conferences, all the meetings she was in, and I looked over so many of her quotes before we did this show, and that was the one that just jumped out at me, because the bottom line is, if she hadn't overcome her inner fears, there's no way in the world she would have had the nerve to do what she did. So I ask you again, What is your fear? What is holding you back, folks? And once again, you may be in a situation where you have no idea, like she didn't, by her overcoming her fears, by her standing up, by her doing the right thing. You may not realize, like she didn't realize, the impact it was going to have on so many people. See, one of the things I deal when I help people get through fear, when I do coaching sessions, is get yourself out of the way. Stop looking at it. So many of us, it's a human trait to just look at ourselves and see everything through our own eyes. And it's real easy as a human being, because we're certainly imperfect, to have fears and doubts and insecurities. But once again, as a coaching point, I try to get people to understand that if they can overcome that fear and do whatever it is they're trying to do they realize they're not just going to impact their lives, they're going to impact dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, and maybe, like in the case of Rosa Parks, millions and millions of lives. So once again, maybe there's a bigger reason than you just overcoming a fear or phobia. Maybe there's a bigger reason in you just fighting back against the injustice you're dealing with that you don't think is that big of a deal. The bottom line is Rosa Parks is a true American hero because she stood up for what she believed in. Are you standing up for everything you believe in your day-to-day lives? And if not, what actions do you need to take? Because the bottom line is it's all about having the character and having the strength to take actions, especially when things are not going the way that they should. So the bottom line is Rosa Parks is one in 100 million, but you may be one in 100 million as well. The bottom line is no one will know if you don't step up and take action and do what you know in your heart you're supposed to do. Rosa Parks is certainly a great example of the power of one. The bottom line is, will you become a great example of that as well? We'll see you on next week's show.